Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I am going to talk about the news about this Vice article about the EHRC written by Ben Hunte, who we know very well as UK feminists because Ben Hunte used to work for the BBC where he was dreadful. Then he moved to Vice after some just awful articles, and since he's been at Vice he's managed to help get Adrian Harrop suspended by writing an article about how the documents which were only given to the claimant and the defendant and the witnesses and nobody else, but somehow Vice was given them all to read through after they did a long photojournalism kind of interview, hagiography of Adrian Harrop. Brilliant journalist. I actually found actual evidence that he is a real journalist. That's a real certificate, that is. He's a real journalist and everything. So Ben Hunte's latest. He's written this email and it's called Britain's Equalities Watchdog met privately with anti-trans groups. It says, exclusive. Leaked emails and documents obtained by Vice World News show how senior leaders at the Equality and Human Rights Commission worked to erase trans rights. First of all, right, this is world news. So of all the human rights abuses that are going on throughout the world, and all the human rights abuses that specifically affect LGBT plus people, and all of the human rights abuses that affect trans people, which is a small, tiny number of people, this is the biggest world news. Because he's not actually a trans reporter. He's meant to report on everything. He's just got very narrow focus. I've done a lot of research into the EHRC because there's been all sorts going on over the past weeks. I have a lot more to say, but first let's deal with this article. So it reads, senior leaders at Britain's Equalities Watchdog have worked to erase trans rights via the courts and held private meetings with anti-trans groups. Leaked emails and documents obtained by Vice World News reveal. Vice World News has obtained documents revealing leaders at the Equality and Human Rights Commission, EHRC, as being key players in removing rights from trans people through supporting legal cases which opposed trans equality. The Commission's executives have also organised multiple private meetings with anti-trans lobbyists over the last year, the emails and documents reveal. And then they insert a nice photograph of Kate Harris and Bev Jackson of the LGB Alliance, who made a submission to the EHRC in February 2021. So, they advocate for lesbian, gay and bisexual people. Sexuality is one of the protected characteristics. So, of course, they submit. Anyway, the EHRC was established in 2007 by the then Labour government to monitor human rights in England, Wales and Scotland, and to enforce equality laws based on protected characteristics such as sexuality, gender reassignment, race and religion. Also sex. Although not part of a government department, the EHRC is a public sector organisation funded by the taxpayer, whose senior leaders are appointed by the government. The organisation's vision and purpose, which is embedded in staff email signatures, says it is committed to standing up for freedom, compassion and justice. Well, that's good then, isn't it? However, emails and documents obtained by Vice World News, some via Freedom of Information Act requests, show current leaders of the EHRC appear to hold views about trans people and gender identity which completely contradict this. Asked about our findings, a spokesperson for the Commission said, "We exist to protect, enforce and promote equality and human rights laws for everyone, including trans people." Equality campaigners have previously complained about the organisation being too politicised because the Commission's most senior leaders, also known as the Commissioners or Board, are appointed by the Minister for Women and Equalities, a role currently held by Liz Truss. In December 2020, Truss, who is also UK Foreign Secretary and a potential successor to Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, appointed Baroness Kishwa Faulkner as chair of the EHRC, which is the most important role in the organisation. Faulkner also serves as a non-aligned member of the House of Lords, and I did a video about Baroness Faulkner just yesterday, which you can watch to get up to speed with her work in the House of Lords defending women's rights. Documents provided to Vice World News by researchers at trans rights organisation Steph's Place reveal a number of controversial meetings were arranged with the EHRC following Faulkner's appointment. So I've also looked into this, right? I've done an entire morning's research on this huge investigation, which Steph's Place UK is saying that it took them years to find out. I mean, to fire off an FOI request doesn't take very long. It's that most of that time is spent waiting. You know, you don't actually have to spend it chewing on your pencil and waiting for the postman to arrive with the results. Anyway, the problem is that, you know, Baroness Faulkner, for whatever reason, and, you know, it could be because she's a woman, it could be because she's a woman from an ethnic minority, who knows? But she has apparently attracted the ire of these activists, and, you know, they never let it go. They never let it go. She's doing a good job, you know. She's actually balancing rights. That's the tough gig that they've got. Anyway, it continues. Nicola Williams, founder of Fair Play for Women, a group which claims to advocate for the sex-based rights of women and girls, was invited to meet with Faulkner. So, I'm pretty sure I can predict how that went on. I'm pretty sure that what would have happened was Nicola Williams probably got in touch and said, "I run an organisation, we you know, represent women, we advocate for women's rights, this is some of the work that we've done. I'd really like to talk with you about the work that you're doing at the EHRC." And, you know, they're kind of obliged to meet with stakeholders. That's their whole remit. So it's not suspect in any way to have a meeting with a women's rights organisation. I mean, how many meetings have they had with bloody Stonewall over the years, for goodness sakes? Anyway, Williams has been accused of transphobia for repeating calling trans women males. Well, they are male, they are men. So, yes, we do get called transphobic for almost anything that we do in defence of women's rights. So most of us have learned to kind of let it flow off us like water off a duck's back, because it doesn't mean anything. It's a word that's used to stop people from questioning this men's sexual rights movement that is claiming to be the great civil rights movement of our time. Williams notes in one email, "With a new chair installed, I hope this can be a moment for change." I think we all had that hope at that moment, because previous to that, the HRC had not been particularly sympathetic to women's rights and seemed to have the ear of the LGBTQ lobby and not have a balancing ear with women's rights. And that's all we want, is an equal level of respect, you know? And with the appointment of a new chair, that was a great opportunity for the EHRC to reach out to women, and they did, which is good. So then it says, suddenly switching to her Parliament email address rather than her EHRC email address, because none of us ever do that on our phones, send emails from the wrong email address, or even just choose to send it by a different. I mean, her parliamentary email address is probably more scrutinised than her EHRC one. And if you put in an FOI request, they'll have to send it out to you. So what is the problem with that? Faulkner sent Williams a message on the 22nd of June 2021 with the title, "Can we have a telephone conversation?" The women then exchanged phone numbers. The women are talking to each other. I mean, for goodness sakes. This is just misogyny. This is just misogyny. That it seems to be a problem for these people, for women to talk to each other. We're allowed to talk to each other. We're allowed to talk to women who've managed to get themselves a position in the corridors of power. We're allowed to do that without having men present to supervise what we do. Vice World News asked 4 leading LGBTQ organisations that support trans rights whether they were given this same opportunity for direct contact with Faulkner in her role as EHRC chair. They all said they hadn't. So, because a woman feels that she wants to give her personal telephone number to another woman, but doesn't give it out to absolutely everybody, that's a problem. Just last week, the EHRC released 2 controversial statements which received a huge backlash from LGBTQ groups. And I'm making a video about that, which it looks like I've delayed it again today because I've spent time doing this one. One statement called for the Scottish Government to delay its work updating trans equality laws, and the other requested the upcoming conversion therapy ban in England and Wales to not cover trans people. No, it didn't. But anyway, that's that. I'll put that in the other video. Stonewall called the statements an attack on trans equality, and the charity created an open letter in support of trans rights, which has now been signed by over 5,000 people, which in a country of, 6, 7 million? How many are in the country? Quite a lot. 5,000 doesn't seem like a lot to me. Anyway, another of the appointed leaders of the EHRC is Alistair Henderson, a barrister who has played a key role in erasing trans rights. In 2020, Henderson represented Kira Bell, a young woman who regretted transitioning. Henderson challenged the NHS use of puberty blockers, claiming that young people cannot consent to using them. As a result, the NHS had to remove all medical treatment options from trans young people until the decision was overturned nearly a year later. You're missing out some key context there, Ben. You're missing out the context of the ages of those young people, because what they actually said was that there were different ages at which people had different level of understanding of the risks and benefits of different kinds of medical treatment, and people were or were not equipped to make those decisions without the involvement of their parents and carers. And in some cases, a High Court judge to assess the balance of rights. But anyway, the leaked documents appear to show Henderson's long-term influence over his colleagues on the EHRC board, and therefore his influence over the organisation becoming more critical of trans lives. No, it doesn't. I've checked the board minutes. It doesn't say that at all. It doesn't say that at all. I cannot find any impropriety in my entire morning of research. So as you are a real journalist with a certificate and everything, maybe you've got better research skills than I have. But I found various board minutes by Alistair Henderson where he declares conflict of interest. I found various board minutes where there was discussion about transgender rights, the work that the EHRC was doing in the field of transgender rights. And I didn't find any impropriety. You know, how it works when you're on a board is that you have to declare any conflicts of interest. So say you have a plumbing company and then there's a board discussion about whether or not you should use a particular plumbing company, and you say, yes, you should use my plumbing company. Well, that's definitely a conflict of interest. And what you should do is say at the start, when you're appointed to the board, that you have a plumbing company. And so therefore, if there are discussions about plumbing, might be a reason why you shouldn't be involved in that discussion. And then when a plumbing discussion is proposed on the agenda, you actually say to the chairperson that you want it minuted that you have a conflict of interest, and you need to make everybody aware of that. And then they have a short discussion and they decide whether or not you should be present for that discussion. And if you should be present, whether or not you should contribute. And if you should contribute, whether or not, you know, you're going to declare your interest. So, you know, there's absolutely no impropriety in him having an actual interest in being a barrister and taking on paying customers who have got various justifiable claims to make, who sometimes succeed and sometimes don't succeed. You know, I mean, having a good barrister is important, but having the evidence to support your case is much more important. That's why people make the decisions. Anyway, in April 2021, the EHRC received a huge backlash from LGBTQ people and their allies for suddenly jumping to the defence of a gender-critical woman in a major legal case. Maya Forstater claimed she lost her job because of her belief that trans women are not women. Assistance from the EHRC helped to close the case in favour of the gender critics, and the case was celebrated by people who hold transphobic views. Through documents released through the Freedom of Information Act, Vice World News has learned that Henderson was the employee who first suggested to intervene in the Forstater hearing. This was confirmed through an email following up on a conversation in a board meeting the day before. And it says here, "Hi both. Following the board discussion yesterday, Alistair P. asked if I could email with the details of potential freedom of speech cases in the context of the trans debate, which it would be good for the Commission to get involved in as part of the overall strategy we decided on. The two cases I initially thought of yesterday are, number 1, Maya Forstater. The best summary of her case is here by the excellent Karen Monahan QC, who is well known to the Commission." So the EHRC has an entire litigation strategy, okay, because their work of overseeing the human rights of everybody that shares these 9 protected characteristics means that they select certain key elements of legislation that are going on because they want to create the case law to actually defend those human rights of those people with those protected characteristics. So they're constantly looking at cases and deciding whether or not to intervene. This is not suspicious. This is the job. This is what they're meant to do. So on the basis of being a woman and having gender critical beliefs which are, you know, largely shared by women, I think that's relevant to Maya Forstater's case. But the case was ultimately won because of her right to hold philosophical and religious beliefs that are worthy of respect in a democratic society. And holding religious or philosophical beliefs is another protected characteristic. So, you know, it was entirely appropriate for them to intervene. Anyway. Asked if this was correct, the EHRC responded, "The suggestion to intervene in the case was made by one of our commissioners, Alistair Henderson. However, it adds, the decision to intervene was ultimately approved by Commission board members and the chair, Kishwa Faulkner. In an online profile, Henderson describes himself as a Christian who would strongly defend freedom of religion and belief, freedom of conscience, and freedom of speech for everyone. He has previously been criticised for liking and retweeting social media posts, criticising Black Lives Matter protesters, and describing the words misogynist and homophobe as highly ideological propaganda terms. The leaked email, I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? If you want to accuse someone of being a misogynist or a homophobe, it is an ideology. That feminism is an ideology, so we name the problem. That's what feminists do, and that involves calling people misogynists, and that is an ideology. Homophobia, I mean, it's a little bit different because there's an ideology which I call queer ideology, and then sexuality, which is not an ideology. So, you know, don't know what. But in any case, he has got the freedom of speech. He can say what he wants. He can say that, I mean, this is not even in his job. This is like in his personal life. Anyway, the leaked emails obtained by Vice World News also show that some senior staff in the EHRC policy teams were not aware of Henderson's involvement in the case against the UK's Gender Identity Service for Young People. Senior staff in the EHRC policy teams are not board-level staff. So the conflict of interests are declared at board level. He doesn't have an obligation to go around to the flipping person that does the security on the door downstairs, checks your lanyard, or anybody else. You know, they are also vital to the operation. It's not that they're not important members of staff, but, you know, he has a certain number of hours in the day, and the way it works in the structure of an organisation that has a board is that, you know, these decisions are taken at board level and everybody else has to just go along with it. The massive legal case stopped the NHS from providing transgender healthcare to under 16s in the UK and caused lasting damage to trans rights globally. Henderson was partnered with Paul Conraith, a Christian lawyer known for legal attacks against abortion, contraception, and LGBTQ rights. Is Christian illegal now? Is it illegal to hold religious beliefs? I mean, I'm pro-choice, but I absolutely defend the right of people to be pro-life. I would call them forced birthers, and to make their case in the public square. Of course they must. They must. After the NHS eventually won the case, allowing trans young people to continue with their gender care, Conraith said he was dismayed and surprised, calling services offered by the NHS Gender Identity Development Service poorly evidenced treatment with lifelong, irreversible consequences. And that's true. Whatever his personal beliefs, that is true. The day before the conclusion of the case made international news, one EHRC communications official wrote, "Alistair Henderson, one of our commissioners, is one of the barristers challenging the Tavistock. Were we aware that he was this involved in the case?" Being passed up the chain, another staff member wrote, "Please see email below. Are we aware of this connection?" And the answer is yes. Yes. And what's more, that information has been publicly available on their website since his appointment to the board, where he has to declare his interests. The pack of leaked documents show on at least 2 occasions when discussions about transgender people were held by the board, Henderson appeared to flag that he had a potential conflict of interest because of his legal work. However, the board still allowed him to continue participating in the discussion. Oh, Ben. Oh, Ben. I'm going to show the certificate again. Ben, it might really help with your job if you actually spent 10 minutes looking into what actually happens in a board meeting and why. Just a suggestion. The emails reveal further evidence of the EHRC becoming more critical of gender identity over recent years. Documents show that Kate Harris and Bev Jackson, founders of the gender-critical LGB Alliance, have held meetings with people at the top of the EHRC since Faulkner took over as chair. In February 2021, the founders were personally invited to participate in a briefing session for the board on issues relating to trans people by Melanie Field, Executive Director of Strategy, Police and Wales at the EHRC. The other organisations invited were Stonewall, Europe's largest LGBTQ charity, and Williams's Fair Play for Women. No other groups were invited to participate. Apologies to email you out of the blue, someone from the EHRC wrote to the LGBT Alliance. The sender's name was redacted. I have a time-limited request, which I wondered if you were able to help with. They continued, I know you have been in contact with colleagues at the Commission and will soon be meeting with Melanie Field. She has asked me to contact you to inquire whether you would be able to provide a short 3-minute video outlining the LGBT Alliance's main policy positions and why you think it's important to separate trans and LGB issues for us to share with the board at tomorrow's session. Field then sent an email thanking the founders of the LGBT Alliance. I'm really keen that our board gets a balanced picture of the different issues being raised in this debate, she wrote. In the video, produced by LGBT Alliance and seen by Vice World News, the founders of the organisation call transitioning horrifying, adding, it leads to a life of infertility, loss of sexual feeling, continuous medication, and appalling surgery. We're so glad that we were not growing up in this kind of ethos which we have today. Discussing how the NHS is carrying out medical experiments on children, they add, we don't need to go into much detail about that because Alistair Henderson on your board will be able to explain all about it. They continue, we represent thousands and thousands of lesbians, gay men and bisexuals who don't hold to this belief in gender identity. Unfortunately, all the other LGBT groups do, so it's really important that we get representation and that our views are heard whenever anything about LGBT issues is being discussed. What's wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with that. That's entirely reasonable and true. Asked why gender-critical groups were invited to speak with the EHRC, but no trans-led organisations were, an EHRC spokesperson said, we hold regular discussions with a full range of interested parties on all areas of our work. Just over a year ago, Faulkner's predecessor as EHRC chair, David Isaacs, warned that the Equality Watchdog was being used as a political tool. His criticism came after Truss announced the EHRC's new chair and commissioners who would drive her agenda forward and challenge dangerous groupthink. In an interview with the UK Guardian newspaper, Isaacs said, my view is that an independent regulator shouldn't be in a position where the governments of the day can actually influence the appointments of that body to support a particular ideology. The UK's biggest trans and LGBTQ organisations have repeatedly called out their frustration and disappointment at the EHRC's failure to protect LGBTQ people's rights and trans people's rights specifically. So all I can hear is I don't know how else you would be appointing people to the national. I mean, the EHRC is like a very, very top level organisation, created by an act of parliament to have the people appointed by government. I mean, that was always how it seems weird to have a go at that. Anyway, In May 2021, leaders from 40 leading LGBTQ charities signed a public letter stating the EHRC has driven forward very little for our communities in recent years. We are frustrated that you choose to intervene in a case to say that so-called gender-critical beliefs should be a protected philosophical belief. This is where we are. A belief in reality and in the two sexes that are common across the entire animal kingdom. Mammals do it, birds do it, insects do it. There are many examples where there are two sexes because there are two roles in reproduction, where there are two types of gametes that have to fuse to form a new individual. That's sexual reproduction. That's not a philosophical belief. That is a reality about the world. Gravity is not a philosophical belief. You may choose to disagree with the idea that gravity is a real force, but gravity still works. Biological sex, you may choose to believe that biological sex doesn't apply in your case, but in actual fact, it will still work. You will still have a biological sex, whether or not you believe in it. In response to last week's EHRC statements on LGBTQ rights, LGBTQ charities and organisations have been publicly questioning how the EHRC can continue to operate. Liberty, a human rights campaign group, said the EHRC's status as a national human rights institution needs to be reviewed. Stonewall echoed this, saying the EHRC had betrayed LGBTQ people. An EHRC spokesperson said, "We are an independent statutory body with a specific responsibility to ensure equality across the 9 protected characteristics of age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage and civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity, race, religion and belief, sex, and sexual orientation. Sometimes this means balancing rights, and we understand that this issue in particular evokes strong views. As we have said, the current polarised debate is causing much harm and distress to people on all sides. Everyone's concerns should be discussed and addressed carefully, openly, and with respect to avoid further damage and division." Because that's the thing, you see, as well as having a remit to look over the protected characteristics and make sure that nobody's being discriminated against, they also have a statutory obligation to promote good relations between the people with different protected characteristics and with everybody else. Because, you know, we live in a social world, so we've all got to get along together. So if you've got 3 children and you give one children all of the pocket money and all of the sweeties, and then you turn your back, those children are going to fight because that's not fair. And in the same way, if you give all the rights to one little group of people, overriding the rights of everybody else in society, then unless you have some kind of totalitarian state which is going to suppress any kind of resistance, that's not going to work. So, choose your adventure, people. Which world do you want to live in? I know which world I want to live in, and it involves a world where we give each other mutual respect. And, you know, it's great that we've got a statutory body that's looking out for the human rights of all of us, isn't it? So, rather long video today. There is still other content coming about the EHRC, but, you know, it is a big topic, so we do have to discuss lots of things, particularly on a day when such an idiotic thing has been published. I mean, I don't know, has it been published on actual paper? I don't even know. Is it a real like paper magazine? Is it just a website? Who knows? Who knows? So thank you for joining me today. Please like and subscribe and share the love. And if you want to support me practically, there's a PayPal link in my description box where you'll find all the links to everything I've talked about today. Thank you so much for your support. It means the absolute world to me. And I'll see you again soon.